Was this how it ended? A slow fade into nothingness, surrounded by steel and glass monuments to a life he no longer recognized as his own? For Elias Vance, the 28th man to be judged by the scuffs on his boots that week, the question hung in the sterile, lemon-scented air of the showroom. Would he shatter the steel walls he'd built around his heart? Or would he let this final, petty indignity be the stone that sealed the tomb of his own making? He looked from the sneer of the salesman to the kind, worried eyes of the woman standing beside him, and a decision, quiet and seismic, took root in the barren soil of his soul. The city was a relentless hum, a symphony of indifference that Elias had come to crave. It was the only music that could drown out the silence of his sprawling, empty mansion on the hill. A place the media called a palace, but he knew was a mausoleum. He walked its streets not as Elias Vance, the tech prodigy who had vanished from the world a decade ago, but as a ghost in a worn flannel shirt and steel-toed work boots that had seen better days. These boots were his last connection to a life before the billions, before the betrayal that had carved out his heart and left a hollow echo in its place. They were relics from a time when his hands were calloused from work, not from clenching into fists in quiet desperation. His daily pilgrimages were formless, a deliberate act of aimlessness. He would ride the bus to its final stop, eat at diners where the coffee was bitter and the conversations were real, and watch the world move on without him. He was a spectator to life, peering through the glass of his self-imposed exile. The money, a figure so vast it had become an abstraction, was a curse. It had built the walls of his prison, gilded its bars, and left him utterly, profoundly alone. It drew sharks and sycophants, but it could not buy the one thing he had lost: a genuine human connection, untainted by the gravity of his wealth. On this particular Tuesday, the gray sky weeping a miserable drizzle, his wandering feet had led him to a place that was the very antithesis of his current existence: a luxury car dealership. Sterling Motors was a temple of chrome and ambition. Cars that cost more than most people's homes sat like polished deities under spotlights, their price tags whispered with reverence. He had no intention of buying anything. He was simply drawn to the cold, clean lines, the perfect manufactured beauty that stood in such stark contrast to the messy, broken thing his life had become. He pushed open the heavy glass door, and the scent of expensive leather and air freshener washed over him. He ran a hand over the cool, flawless fender of a midnight blue sedan, feeling the grit on his fingertips against its perfect sheen. He was an anomaly in this pristine environment, a smudge on a masterpiece, and it did not take long for him to be noticed. "Can I help you?" The voice was slick with a practiced, insincere charm. The salesman, whose name tag read Marcus, had hair that looked sculpted from black lacquer and a suit so sharp it could have drawn blood. His eyes, however, did not meet Elias's. They were fixed on the worn, muddy toes of his boots. Elias felt the familiar, dull ache of judgment. He had felt it 1,000 times. It was the price of his anonymity, the penance he paid for pretending to be someone he was not. He just nodded, his voice rough from disuse. "Just looking." Marcus's smile was a thin, predatory slash. "Of course. Feel free to look. The used car lot is about 5 miles down the highway on the right. You can't miss it. They have some real, sturdy models there. More your speed." I'd imagine the condescension was a physical thing, a slap in the face. It was designed to make him feel small, to eject him from this world where he so clearly did not belong. For a moment, the old Elias, the one who had built an empire from nothing, flared to life inside him. The instinct to crush this insignificant man, to reveal himself and watch the smug superiority crumble into terrified obsequiousness, was a powerful surge. But it faded as quickly as it came, leaving behind only the familiar emptiness. What was the point? It would change nothing. It would only reinforce the prison walls. He was about to turn and walk away, to retreat back into his silent world, when a second voice, softer and hesitant, cut through the tension. "Marcus, that's enough." Elias turned his head. Standing a few feet away was a woman, another salesperson by her uniform, though hers was less sharp, softened by wear. She had tired lines around her eyes, but the eyes themselves were clear and direct. Her name tag read, Clara. She was holding a bottle of water, which she extended towards him. "I'm so sorry about that," she said, her gaze meeting his without a hint of judgment. "It's a bit warm in here. Would you like some water?" It was such a small gesture, a simple act of decency. In his world of calculated transactions and veiled motives, it was a sudden, shocking light in the darkness. He looked from her earnest face to Marcus's dismissive sneer. She wasn't trying to sell him a car. She wasn't trying to get anything from him. She was just being kind. The gesture disarmed him. It bypassed the walls and touched something dormant inside him. He felt a flicker of something he hadn't felt in a very long time. Curiosity. He took the bottle of water, his calloused fingers brushing against hers. "Thank you," he murmured. He decided in that instant not to leave. He pointed to the nearest car, a silver convertible that gleamed like a pool of mercury. "Tell me about this one," he said to her, his eyes never leaving her face. Clara looked surprised, but she recovered quickly. She launched into a description of the car, not with a rehearsed sales pitch, but with genuine, if slightly weary, knowledge. She spoke of engine specifications and safety ratings, of the surprising trunk space and the smoothness of the ride. She answered his questions honestly, admitting a minor drawback about its fuel efficiency in city traffic. Marcus hovered nearby, rolling his eyes, making it clear he thought she was wasting her time on a vagrant. Elias listened, but he was watching her. He saw the way she pushed a stray strand of hair from her face, the faint tremor in her hand that suggested a deep, underlying exhaustion. He saw integrity. He saw a person, not a predator. When she had finished, he nodded slowly. The silence stretched. Clara waited patiently, with no expectation in her eyes. It was Marcus who broke the spell. "All right, show's over. Unless you're planning on paying with bottle caps, I think it's time for you to move along." Elias ignored him completely. He looked at Clara, at this stranger who had offered him a bottle of water and a moment of respect. An idea, wild and impulsive, began to form. It was a reckless thought, born of a decade of pent-up frustration and a sudden, desperate need to do something that mattered, to use his cursed wealth not as a shield, but as a tool, to reward this one small act of kindness in a world that had shown him so little of it. He turned his gaze from Clara and let it sweep across the entire showroom, from the sports cars in the front window to the luxury sedans in the back. He took in every polished hood, every gleaming hubcap. Then he looked back at Marcus, whose face was a mask of impatient disgust. Finally, his eyes settled on Clara again. "I need to speak with your manager," he said, his voice calm and steady, betraying none of the storm that was gathering inside him. Clara's face fell slightly, a flicker of worry in her eyes. She probably thought he was going to complain about Marcus, to cause a scene that could get her in trouble. "Of course," she said quietly. "I'll go get him." The manager was a man named Sterling, a portly figure whose expensive suit seemed a size too small for him. He moved with an air of self-importance, his eyes immediately dismissing Elias just as Marcus's had. "Is there a problem here?" he asked, his tone suggesting that Elias himself was the problem. "No problem at all," Elias said, his voice still unervingly level. He gestured vaguely around the showroom. "I'd like to make a purchase." Sterling's expression shifted from annoyance to mild interest. "Excellent. Marcus can help you with that. Which vehicle has caught your eye?" Elias held up a hand. "Not vehicle. Vehicles," he corrected gently. "All of them." A thick silence descended on the showroom. Sterling stared. Marcus snorted out a laugh, a harsh, ugly sound. "Right? And I'm the King of England. Look, pal, we've had our fun, but it's time to go." Elias didn't even glance at him. He kept his eyes fixed on the manager. "I am perfectly serious. I want to buy every car on this lot, and the ones in your back inventory as well. I will wire the full amount immediately. I have only 2 conditions." Sterling's face was a comical canvas of confusion and disbelief. He looked from Elias to Clara, who seemed to have stopped breathing. 2 conditions? He repeated, his voice a skeptical squeak. First, Elias said, I will need you to draw up the purchase paperwork for the entire lot. Right now, he paused, letting the weight of his words settle. Then he delivered the second condition, turning his head slightly to look directly at Clara, whose eyes were wide with shock. And second, Mr. Sterling, this young woman, Clara, is to receive the full sales commission. For every single car. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. Marcus's jaw dropped, his sneer replaced by a slack-jawed stupor. Sterling blinked rapidly, as if trying to reboot his brain. He clearly thought this was some elaborate prank, a delusion. Sir, I don't think you understand the value of what you're talking about. We're talking about millions of dollars. I have a general idea, Elias said dryly. He pulled out a simple burner-style cell phone, a far cry from the cutting-edge tech his former company produced. He dialed a number from memory. Arthur, it's me. Yes, I'm fine. I need you to authorize a transfer. I'll text you the account details for a dealership called Sterling Motors. The amount? Let's start with an even 20 million. That should cover it. If it's more, let me know. And I need you to speak to the manager here and verify the funds are available. Yes, now. He handed the phone to the stunned Mr. Sterling. The manager took it hesitantly, like it might be a snake. He put it to his ear, his expression shifting from disbelief to shock, then to wide-eyed, avaricious awe as he listened to the calm, professional voice of Elias Vance's chief financial officer. He stammered a few, yes, sirs, and understood, sirs, before hanging up, his hand trembling as he gave the phone back. The atmosphere in the showroom had transformed. The air crackled with a new kind of energy. Elias was no longer a vagrant. He was an enigma, a force of nature that had just swept through their predictable world. Sterling was now looking at him with a mixture of fear and profound respect, the kind reserved for gods and monstrously wealthy clients. My apologies, sir, Sterling stammered, his face flushed. We will get the paperwork started immediately. Immediately. Marcus, get out of my sight. Clara, you will handle everything for this gentleman. Marcus stood frozen, his face pale. He looked at Elias, at the worn-out boots, and then at Clara, who was now the center of this impossible new universe. The humiliation was a burning fire in his eyes. He turned and slunk away, disappearing into a back office. Elias turned his full attention to Clara. She was leaning against the desk for support, her face as white as a sheet. She looked at him, her expression a whirlwind of confusion, gratitude, and a healthy dose of fear. I don't understand, she whispered. Why? It was the question he had been asking himself for 10 years. Why do anything? But this felt right, felt clean. You gave me a bottle of water, he said, the explanation feeling both ridiculously simple and profoundly true. You were kind. The process took days. The sheer logistics of selling an entire dealership's inventory to a single buyer were staggering. Elias insisted on staying to oversee the process, a transparent excuse to remain in Clara's orbit. He shed the flannel shirt for a simple, clean Henley and jeans he had his driver deliver, but he kept the boots. They were his anchor. He watched as Clara, initially overwhelmed, rose to the occasion. She worked with a quiet, fierce competence, her exhaustion replaced by a determined energy. The commission, a life-altering sum of money, was a tangible reality now, and it was changing her. In the quiet moments between frantic phone calls and mountains of paperwork, they talked. He learned that her name was Clara Bellwether, that she was a widow, and that she had an 8-year-old daughter named Lily. He saw a picture of a bright-eyed girl with a gap-toothed smile, and his hollow chest ached with a forgotten tenderness. He learned that Lily had been sick. A rare autoimmune disorder required expensive treatments that their insurance barely covered. Clara had been working 2 jobs, drowning in debt, fighting a silent, desperate battle to keep her daughter healthy and her world from collapsing. The money he had so casually spent, an amount that was a rounding error to him, was her miracle. It was the end of her fear. He found himself opening up to her in ways he hadn't with anyone in a decade. He didn't tell her his name or the source of his wealth. He was just Eli, a man who had done well for himself but had lost his way. He spoke of the suffocating loneliness that came with success, the feeling of being a commodity rather than a person. He spoke of a deep loss, a betrayal from a business partner who had been his best friend, a man who had not only stolen his company but had also been responsible for the accident that took his wife. He didn't give her the details, just the shape of the wound. She listened. She didn't offer platitudes or easy comfort. She just listened, her gaze filled with a profound empathy that he felt in his very bones. For the first time in 10 years, he felt seen. Not as a billionaire, not as a recluse, but as a man. A sad, broken man, but a man nonetheless. One afternoon, a small whirlwind of energy burst into the dealership. "Mommy!" Clara's face lit up with a love so pure it was breathtaking. "Lilybug, what are you doing here? Grandma was supposed to take you home. Grandma's car made a funny noise, so we took the bus," the little girl announced, her eyes wide and curious, landing on Elias. "Who's that?" "Lily, this is my friend, Eli," Clara said, her cheeks faintly pink. "Eli, this is my daughter, Lily." Elias knelt so his eyes were level with the child's. "It's very nice to meet you, Lily." Lily stared at his boots. "Those are funny boots," she declared with the unfiltered honesty of a child. "They're all dirty, but I like them. They look like they've been on adventures." A genuine smile, a true and unforced thing, touched Elias's lips. "They have," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "A long time ago." He spent the rest of the afternoon with them. He helped Lily with her spelling homework while Clara finished the last of the paperwork. He listened to her chatter about her school play, about her favorite dinosaur, a velociraptor, and about how her mom was the best mom in the whole world. He felt a sense of peace settle over him, a warmth spreading through his veins. This was real. This was what he had been missing. A simple afternoon of homework and conversation. It felt more valuable than all the money in his accounts. The connection between them deepened. It was fragile, tentative, but it was there. He started to imagine a future, a possibility he had long since discarded. A future where he wasn't just a ghost. A future where he might be Eli to this woman and her daughter. Hope, a dangerous and unfamiliar emotion, began to bloom in the wasteland of his heart. But he had built this burgeoning new reality on a foundation of omission, a lie of identity. And the past had a way of refusing to stay buried. Marcus, consumed by a venomous cocktail of jealousy and rage, had not disappeared. He had been digging. Fueled by spite, he spent his days in the library, scrolling through old business articles, trying to figure out who the mysterious man in the worn-out boots was. He only had a first name, Eli, and a face. It wasn't much, but it was enough. He finally found it. A faded photograph in a 10-year-old financial magazine. The man in the picture was younger, his eyes brighter, but there was no mistaking him. Elias Vance, the reclusive tech billionaire. The man who had dropped off the face of the earth. He didn't hesitate. He took the information not to the press, but to Mr. Sterling. Revenge was sweet, but profit was sweeter. Sterling, a man whose morality was as flexible as his balance sheets, saw an opportunity far greater than the commission from the car sales. He saw blackmail. Sterling called Clara into his office the next day. The false, fatherly smile he wore did not reach his cold, calculating eyes. He slid the magazine article across his polished desk. "I think you need to see this, my dear." Clara looked down. She saw the photograph and her blood ran cold. The name underneath it, Elias Vance, meant nothing to her, but the face was unmistakably Eli's. She read the first few paragraphs, her heart pounding a frantic, sick rhythm against her ribs. Tech mogul Elias Vance, a estimated net worth of $9 billion, disappeared from public view following the tragic death of his wife and a hostile takeover by former partner. The room began to spin. Billions. A wife. A life he had never even hinted at. The man she had been getting to know, the quiet, sad man named Eli, was an illusion. He was a lie. "He's been playing you, Clara?" Sterling said, his voice oozing a synthetic sympathy. "A game for a bored rich man. He comes in here, pretends to be some working-class hero, and sweeps you off your feet. It's a cruel, twisted fantasy." "No," she whispered, shaking her head. "That's not him," but even as she said it, doubt, cold and sharp, pierced her heart. The secrecy, the vagueness about his past, the sheer absurdity of buying an entire car dealership. It all clicked into place in the most horrifying way. "I'm afraid it is," Sterling continued, leaning forward. "And now we have a problem. The media would have a field day with this. Grieving billionaire preys on desperate single mother, it would ruin him. And it would drag you and your sweet little Lily right through the mud. But," he paused, letting the threat hang in the air, "I think I can protect you. If you help me convince Mr. Vance that a significant donation to my, let's call it a discretion fund, is in everyone's best interest." The implication was clear. Extortion. And he wanted her to be his accomplice. Nausea rose in her throat. She felt trapped, betrayed, and utterly foolish. She had allowed herself to trust him, to feel something for him. And it had all been a lie. She found Elias later that day, waiting for her by the front entrance as he always did. He smiled when he saw her, a real smile that now looked like a mask. She couldn't breathe. "Eli," she began, her voice trembling, "we need to talk." She led him to a small, empty office and closed the door. She didn't waste time. She threw the magazine article onto the desk between them. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice cracking with the effort of holding back tears. "Who are you, really?" Elias looked at the article, and all the color drained from his face. He looked up at her, his eyes filled with a desperate plea. "Clara, I can explain." "Explain what?" she cried, her control finally shattering. "Explain that your name isn't Eli? That you're a billionaire? That this whole thing, the cars, the kindness, me, was just some game for you? A way to cure your boredom?" "No. It was never a game," he insisted, stepping towards her. "It was the opposite of a game. It was the only real thing that has happened to me in 10 years. I didn't tell you because my name, my money, it poisons everything. It changes how people see me. I wanted someone to see me. The man in the boots. Not the man in that magazine." His words were earnest, desperate, but to her wounded heart, they sounded like excuses. The foundation of their connection, the quiet trust they had built, had been based on a monumental deception. He hadn't trusted her with the most basic truth about himself. How could she believe anything else he said? "So you lied," she said, her voice flat and dead. "You let me believe you were just some normal person. You let me tell you about my debts, my fears for Lily, while you were sitting on billions of dollars. Do you have any idea how that feels? How foolish I feel." "I never wanted you to feel foolish," he said, his voice raw with pain. "I wanted to help. You wanted to play God," she shot back. "And now your little game has put me and my daughter in danger. Sterling knows. He wants to use me to blackmail you. He threatened to ruin us in the press." The fear for Lily was a cold knot in her stomach, overriding everything else. She couldn't risk her daughter's safety, her privacy. Not for him. Not for this lie. She took a deep, shuddering breath and looked at him, her eyes hard. She had to cut him out. It was the only way to protect her child. "I can't do this," she said, the words tearing her apart. "I can't be a part of whatever this is. I need you to leave, Elias. I need you to go and never come back." She used his real name. It was a blade, and it struck him right in the heart. He visibly flinched, the hope that had bloomed within him withering on the vine. He saw the finality in her eyes, the fear that had replaced the warmth. He had done this. He had brought the poison of his old life into hers and destroyed the one beautiful thing he had found. He didn't argue. He just nodded, his face a mask of utter desolation. He turned and walked out of the office, out of the dealership, and out of her life. The glass door swung shut behind him, and with it, the door to the future he had just started to believe was possible. The mansion had never felt so cold. Elias walked through the cavernous rooms, the sound of his footsteps echoing the emptiness inside him. He had been cast out. The rejection was a physical agony, a confirmation of his deepest fear. He was unworthy of connection, destined to be alone. The cynical fortress he had built around his heart, which had briefly shown cracks of light, was now sealed shut, stronger and more impenetrable than ever. He had failed. He had tried to step out of his prison only to find that he had built it inside himself. His wealth wasn't just a set of external circumstances. It was a part of him, a taint he couldn't wash away. By hiding it, he had created a lie that was even more toxic than the truth. Clara's words echoed in his mind. "I need you to leave." He collapsed into a leather armchair in his vast, dark library, a glass of untouched whiskey in his hand. The old, wounded Elias was back in control, whispering its familiar, venomous truths. "You see, this is what happens when you try. You destroy everything you touch. You are a curse." Despair, thick and suffocating, settled over him like a shroud. His phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. A single sentence. 24 hours to transfer 50 million, or the story of the billionaire and his pet project hits the front page. Sterling. The threat was real. Sterling would not hesitate to destroy him, and he would drag Clara and Lily through the public humiliation without a second thought. Elias felt a wave of resignation. He couldn't fix what he had broken with Clara, but he could protect her. He could pay. He could use his cursed money to make the problem go away, to shield her and Lily from the fallout of his foolishness. He would transfer the funds, erase himself from their lives completely, and retreat back into his gilded cage for good. It was the only thing left to do. It was his penance. He was about to call his financial advisor to surrender when the phone rang. It wasn't a text this time, but a call. The caller ID showed Clara's name. His heart lurched. Had she changed her mind? A wild, irrational flicker of hope ignited in the darkness. He answered, his hand trembling. "Clara?" But the voice on the other end was not hers. It was small, high-pitched, and clear as a bell. "Ellie." "It's me, Lily." Elias's breath caught in his throat. He couldn't speak. "Mommy's crying in her room," the little girl said, her voice filled with a childish concern that was more piercing than any accusation. "She won't tell me why, but I wanted to ask you something. My school play is tomorrow night. I'm the narrator. It's a very important job. You promised you would come. Are you still coming?" The simple, innocent question shattered him. Promise. He had made a promise to a child. In the midst of his grand, dramatic gesture of buying the cars, in the quiet moments of connection, he had made a simple human promise. Promise to show up. And here he was, hiding in his fortress of self-pity, about to surrender to a petty tyrant, about to break that promise. Lily's trust, her unwavering belief that he was just Eli, her friend who wore funny boots and helped her with her homework, cut through the layers of his despair. He suddenly remembered why. It was never about punishing Marcus or impressing Clara. It was about the feeling he got when she first offered him that bottle of water. It was about the light in Lily's eyes. It was about a future he wanted to be worthy of. He couldn't get that future by hiding or surrendering. He had been trying to run from Elias Vance and his power, but maybe he had been running from the wrong thing. The power itself wasn't the poison. His fear of it was. His refusal to wield it, to take responsibility for it, was the real weakness. He had been hiding not just his money, but his strength. A new resolve, hard as diamond, formed in his chest. He would not pay Sterling. He would not run. He would fight. He would use the very power he had hidden to protect the people he cared about. He would stop being the ghost in old boots and become Elias Vance again. Not the broken recluse, but the titan he once was. "Yes, Lily," he said. His voice no longer hollow but filled with a strength he hadn't felt in a decade. "I'll be there." I promise. He hung up the phone and stood. The despair was gone, burned away by a clean, cold fury and a renewed sense of purpose. He walked to his desk and made a different call. Not to his financial advisor, but to a name deep in his contacts list, a man he hadn't spoken to in years. Robert, he said when the man answered. It's Elias Vance. I need my legal team. All of them. I want them in my office in 1 hour. The next morning, 2 black sedans, silent and imposing, pulled up in front of Sterling Motors. Mr. Sterling, who had been anxiously awaiting confirmation of his wire transfer, watched from his office window as the car doors opened. He expected to see a humbled courier. He did not expect to see Elias Vance step out, not in old boots and a Henley, but in a perfectly tailored charcoal suit that radiated power and authority. He looked like the man from the magazine, but older, harder, and infinitely more dangerous. He was flanked by a team of lawyers who moved with the predatory grace of sharks. Elias strode into the dealership, his presence silencing the room. He walked past the reception desk, past the stunned salespeople, and went directly to Sterling's office without knocking. He entered to find Sterling scrambling to his feet, his face a mask of shock and fear. Vance, Sterling stammered. I was expecting a wire transfer. Plans changed, Elias said, his voice devoid of all warmth. He placed a thick file on Sterling's polished desk. My team is very efficient. It's amazing what you can find when you know where to look. For example, you can find shell corporations in offshore accounts. You can find fraudulent inventory reports. You can find years of systematic tax evasion. It's all in there. Sterling's face turned the color of ash. He stared at the file as if it were a bomb. You tried to extort me, Elias continued, his voice dropping to a low, menacing growl. You threatened a single mother and her child. You thought because I wore old boots that I was weak. You are mistaken, he leaned forward, placing his hands on the desk. Here is what is going to happen. You are going to resign, effective immediately. You are going to sell this dealership to me for $1. And then you are going to disappear. If I ever hear your name again, if you ever come within 100 miles of Clara Bellwether or her daughter, this file goes to the district attorney. Do you understand me? Sterling, trembling, could only nod. The fight had gone out of him, replaced by the primal fear of a man whose world had just been utterly and completely dismantled. Elias turned and left without a backward glance. His lawyer stayed behind to ensure the terms were met. As he walked out of the dealership, he saw Marcus, who had apparently been rehired, trying to make himself invisible behind a potted plant. Elias paused and met his gaze. He didn't say a word. He didn't have to. The look in his eyes was enough. The antagonist, the external force of greed and corruption, had been vanquished, not with a simple flash of wealth, but with a decisive, strategic application of the power he had for so long denied. His next stop was not his mansion. It was Clara's small, modest apartment. He knocked on the door, his heart pounding. When she opened it, she looked tired and pale, her eyes red-rimmed. She flinched when she saw him. "What are you doing here?" she asked, her voice wary. "I'm not here to make excuses," he said softly. "I'm here to apologize. I was wrong to lie to you, Clara. I was a coward. I was so afraid of what my name meant that I hid from it, and in doing so, I hurt you. I am so sorry." He then told her everything. He told her about Sterling, about the blackmail, and what he had just done. He explained that the threat was gone, that she and Lily were safe. He didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply laid the truth before her, raw and unfiltered. "I bought this dealership," he continued, "because for the first time in a decade, I felt something. I saw your kindness, and it reminded me of a part of myself I thought was dead. But I don't want to own a car dealership. I want to do something good with it. With all of it." He laid out his plan. He wanted to use the cars, the entire multimillion-dollar inventory, to start a charitable foundation. A fleet of vehicles for a local women's shelter. A transportation service for families who needed to travel for specialized medical care, just like she had for Lily. an organization that could make a real, tangible difference. "But I can't do it alone," he said, his gaze unwavering. "I don't know how. You do. You know what it's like to struggle, to fight. You have the heart for it. I'm asking you to run it. Not for me, but with me. As my partner." Clara stared at him, her mind reeling. He wasn't offering her a handout. He was offering her a purpose. He was offering her a partnership based on the truth, on respect for her strength and integrity. The wall of her anger and hurt began to crumble, replaced by a dawning understanding. He wasn't the man she feared he was. He was the man she had hoped he was, just hidden under a mountain of pain and wealth. She didn't give him an answer right away. But that night, at the school auditorium, as Lily stood on stage, proudly narrating the school play, she looked out into the audience. She saw him sitting in the back row, his suit jacket off, his tie loosened. He wasn't watching the play. He was watching Lily, a look of quiet pride and profound tenderness on his face. When he felt her gaze, he looked over at her and gave her a small, hopeful smile. And in that moment, she knew. She smiled back. A year later, the world looked different. The Vance Bellwether Foundation was a thriving reality, a beacon of hope in the city. Clara, no longer a weary salesperson but a confident and passionate director, had found her calling. She managed the logistics, interviewed the families, and saw firsthand the difference they were making. Her partnership with Elias was one of deep respect and growing affection. The lie that had almost torn them apart had been replaced by a radical honesty. Elias was a changed man. He had sold the monstrous mansion on the hill and moved into a comfortable, light-filled house in a quiet neighborhood. He was present, he was engaged. The wealth was no longer a burden but a tool, and he wielded it with purpose and humility. He spent his afternoons not wandering aimlessly, but helping Lily with her homework, teaching her to ride a bike, and listening to her endless, wonderful stories. One crisp autumn afternoon, he and Clara walked past the old Sterling Motors building. It had been completely renovated, turned into the foundation's headquarters. The giant glass windows no longer showcased luxury cars but displayed photos of the families they had helped. Elias was wearing his old work boots. He had kept them. They were no longer a relic of a painful past or a costume for his hidden life. They were a reminder of the day he walked into a showroom as a ghost and was met with an act of kindness that brought him back to life. Clara slipped her hand into his. "You're quiet today," she said softly. He looked down at their intertwined fingers, then at the building, then at her. "I was just thinking," he said, a slow, genuine smile spreading across his face, "about how a simple bottle of water can change everything." That evening, the three of them sat on the porch of their new home, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and purple. Lily was curled up between them, reading a book aloud. Her voice was the only sound in the peaceful quiet. Elias wrapped his arm around Clara, pulling her close. He was no longer Elias Vance, the recluse, or Eli, the mystery. He was just Elias, partner, a father figure, a man who had found his way home. This, he realized, was what true wealth felt like. It wasn't the number in a bank account. It was the warmth of a hand in his, the sound of a child's laughter, the quiet peace of a shared sunset. He had finally found something that money could never buy, and he knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his soul, that he would never let it go.